there's an historic opportunity here to change the world. And it's very important for the loved ones of our troops to understand that the mission is an important, vital mission for the security of America and for the ability to change the world for the better. Let's see. Ed.
Mr. President, good evening. You've talked on the, I'd like to ask you about the August 6th PDB.
Sure.
You mentioned it at Fort Hood on Sunday. You pointed out that it did not warn of a hijacking of airplanes to crash into buildings, but that it warned of hijacking to obviously take hostages and to secure the release of extremists being held by the U.S. Did that trigger some specific actions on your part in the administration, since it dealt with potentially hundreds of lives and a blackmail attempt on the United States government?
Yeah. Ed, I asked for the briefing, and the reason I did is because there had been a lot of threat intelligence from overseas, and so part of it had to do with the Genoa G8 conference that I was going to attend. And I asked at that point in time, let's make sure we are paying attention here at home as well. And that's what triggered the report. The report itself, I've characterized as mainly history. And I think when you look at it, you'll see that it was talking about 97 and 98 and 99. There was also an indication, as you mentioned, that that bin Laden might want to hijack an airplane, but as you said, not to fly into a building, but perhaps to release a person in jail. In other words, you serve it as a blackmail. And of course that concerns me. All those reports concern me. As a matter of fact, I was dealing with terrorism a lot as the president when George Tenet came in to brief me. I mean, that's where I got my information. I changed the way that the relationship between the president and the CIA director, and I wanted Tenet in the Oval Office all the time, and we had briefings about terrorist threats. This was a summary. Now, in the what's called the PDB, there was a warning about bin Laden's desires on America. But frankly, I didn't think that was anything new. I mean, that major newspapers had talked about bin Laden's desires on hurting America. What was interesting in there was that there was a report that the FBI was conducting field investigations, and that was good news that they were doing their job. The way my administration worked, Ed, was that I met with Tenet all the time, obviously met with my principals a lot. We talked about threats that have emerged. We had a counter-terrorism group meeting on a regular basis to analyze the threats that came in. Had there been a threat that required action by anybody in the government, I would have dealt with it. In other words, had they come up and said, this is where we see something happening, you can rest assured that the people of this government would have responded, and responded in a forceful way. I mean, one of the things about Elizabeth's question was I stepped back and I've asked myself a lot, is there anything we could have done to stop the attacks? Of course I've asked that question, as have many people of my government. Nobody wants this to happen to America. And the answer is that had I had any inkling whatsoever that the people were going to fly airplanes into buildings, we would have moved heaven and earth to save the country. Just like we're working hard to prevent a further attack. Let's see, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned the PDB and the assurance you got that the FBI was working on terrorism investigations here. The number they had used was 70. But we learned today in the September 11th hearings that the acting director of the FBI at the time now says the FBI tells him that number was wrong, that he doesn't even know how it got into your PDB. And two of the commissioners strongly suggested the number was exaggerated. Have you learned anything else about that report since that time, and do you now believe you were falsely comforted by the FBI?
Yeah. No, I heard about that today, obviously, and my response to that was I expect to get valid information. As the ultimate decision maker for this country, I expect information that comes to my desk to be real and valid. And I presume the 9/11 Commission will find out, will follow up on his suggestions and his recollection and garner the truth. That is an important part of the 9/11 Commission's job, is to analyze what went on and what could have perhaps been done differently so that we can better secure America for the future. But of course I expect to get valid information. I can't make good decisions unless I get valid information.
Has the FBI come back to you, sir?
No, I haven't talked to anybody today yet. I will, though. We'll find out. John.
Thank you, Mr. President. 2 weeks ago, former counterterrorism official at the NSC, Richard Clark, offered an unequivocal apology to the American people for failing them prior to 9/11. Do you believe the American people deserve a similar apology from you, and would you be prepared to give them one?
Look, I can understand why people in my administration are anguished over the fact that people lost their life. I feel the same way. I mean, I'm sick when I think about the death that took place on that day. I feel the same way. I mean, I'm sick when I think about the death that took place on that day.